barbell shoulder press, or also known as a military press. So the first thing we're going to talk about in regards to our setup is our hand positioning, due to what it's going to do to our elbow positioning and what that will do in relation to our shoulders on our rib cage. So oftentimes we see people at the gym, they get their hands way too wide. And when they do that, when their hands go wide, the first thing I want you to notice is what it does to my elbows. So as my hands get wider, you'll notice that my elbows go further and further past my body. So if my hands are relatively tight, you can see that my elbow is in front of my torso. If I get my hands wider on a fixed object, being the bar, typically that's going to drive my elbows behind my torso. If we're talking about good, clean overhead pressing mechanics, allowing our shoulder blade to pull around our rib cage to get full upward rotation to allow us to get to a full overhead position, it's going to be a lot harder if I'm starting in this position to where my elbows are past my torso due to what it's doing to my shoulder blade positioning and the relative muscles that are at play. The other piece is the rotation. So if my hands are staying fixed on a bar and I get my hands wider and my elbow is going behind my body and coming up, what that's doing is that's putting me in internal rotation of my shoulder, and then typically it's putting a lot of the extension into my wrist, where a lot of people don't have that mobility, and it hurts their shoulder, especially as they go to press out of that bottom position. So where we want to be is we like to set up with our hands relatively closer, so that way it puts our elbows in a good stacked position relative to our wrists, puts our elbows a little bit in front of our torso. So when we go to press, it allows us to press in what we call the scapular plane. It takes a lot of stress off those shoulder joints, and you don't create nearly as much internal rotation, which is typically really aggravating for most people when they do barbell overhead work. So we're going to go through that. Grabbing the bar, I like to kind of put my index finger close to the knurling. So when I come up, I have my elbows relatively in front of my torso. When I'm going to go into that full overhead position, that allows my shoulder blades to track in what we call that scapular plane, where there's a lot less compensations that occur, the motion's a lot freer, there's much less irritability that occurs. The other piece is when we're doing a military press, or a barbell overhead or shoulder press, there's no leg drive. This is pure, strict shoulder pressing. And the last piece is what we're doing with our low back. So it's often seen this huge compensation pattern to where you are really arching through your back and you're leaning back to press, where it pretty much turns into an incline bench press where our upper pec can take over significantly. So we're trying to stay with some lumbar spine extension because that's normal, but we're not over exaggerating. So I like to engage your glutes. Think about gripping the floor with your feet, pushing your heels into the ground to create tension and pressure. My feet stay hip width apart, and then I drive straight up from that position without excessively arching my back. Again, you want some extension, especially as we move up into your upper back, because extension is coupled with upward rotation of those arms as we get into that full overhead position.